Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for tuning in to Live with Andy. I'm your host, Andy Dybala. How are you guys doing this afternoon? I hope you've been having a wonderful week so far. I know I've had my struggles. Just ask those close around me with my heart medication switch. The mornings are quite the struggle until my chemicals start balancing out. But nevertheless, we trudge on here, trying to take down the deep state at Live with Andy. George Webb shall be joining us. I believe he's coming at the half hour mark here at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. He's a busy man traveling around the country, meeting and greeting people, getting to the bottom of some stories. So we're going to catch up on some of the work that he's been up to in the past week. Thankfully, he comes on the show every single Wednesday and showcases that work. And we here at Live with Andy and Neighborhood News thinks it's cutting edge stuff because he seems to be ahead of the storyline by a couple months at the very least. You always see George Webb come out with some storylines, and then mainstream media. You know, if you're paying attention to George Webb, you'll notice the mainstream media is always following. And I think they're following him as well on Twitter at Real George Webb 1. So be patient here before George joins the show. I'm going to be digging into the DTRA a little bit here, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. We've been talking a lot about the DTRA on Live with Andy with George Webb and their domain project that spit out the remdesivir and famotidine therapeutics. And one of the things that that we've been also working on is their cooperation with the Soviet Union and Russia. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the United States brought all their offensive weapons scientists into our Defense Department programs, and we started working with anthrax, and we started working with these coronaviruses, and synthetic biology starts emerging on the market. And that's all after the Soviet scientists were adopted into the United States programs. And there's been some questions, some misinformation out there about the DTRA's relationship with Russia. And we know Michael Callahan has done a lot of work with the Soviet scientists. He was knee deep in their biolabs, working alongside them as we brought them into the United States. So I have actually a nice little video here it's from the DTRA's Facebook page. You can find a lot of good information on the DTRA's Facebook page. And this video is titled "Russia is Not Transparent About Its Previous Work with the United States Government in the WMD Space. Russia knows what the DTRA and CTR program Russia knows what the DTRA CTR program is doing with the U.S. because they were an active participant from 1996 to 2013 until their withdrawal. And Russia, they've had some biological attacks around their border. We know the United States had some undercover biolabs in Ukraine. We know Metabiota and Black and Veatch were involved in those biolabs, and Russia didn't like that fact. And there's a reason they knew they were up and running, is because their former scientists were involved in a lot of the projects. So here's a nice little video the DTRA made involving the relationship with Russia. I'm going to read some of the stuff on the screen here for my audio only audience on the Apple Podcast, Spotify Podcast, Amazon Play. Yeah, you guys can go out there and listen to me. You don't have to just watch the cowboy on screen here. You can listen to me as well. And I'm available on all the audio networks out there. So here we go with this wonderful video the DTRA made. And George Webb shall be joining us at the half-hour mark. Cooperative Threat Reduction, former partnership with Russia. The DTRA Cooperative Threat Reduction Program works with partner countries to prevent the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and eliminate chemical, biological. After working with Russia for almost 15 years and successfully disarming weapons of mass destruction together, Russia severed ties with the program in 2013. This is the story of how the U.S. worked with Russia to reduce the WMD threat, how Russia turned against the U.S. and its neighbors. Oh, by the way, did you guys see, before I continue on with, did you guys see, speaking of chemical, biological, and radiological threats, over here in Ukraine, we sent some of them depleted uranium shells over to Ukraine, and unfortunately there was a large explosion yesterday, I believe, or the day before, and there's some radiological matter being spewed about in the area. And this is from James Perazzo on Twitter. Watch how not a single supporter of Ukraine will criticize the UK for providing depleted uranium shells, the destruction of which is now endangering Ukrainian civilians. Why? Because they don't care about Ukraine at all beyond it being a useful weapon against Russia and Putin. And part of this this program that I'm playing the video of, the DTRA and Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, they took a lot of the chemical and biological threats from the Soviet Union, and they stored them in Ukraine, along with like weapons, armaments, and they stored like missiles and trucks. There's like a whole, they stored a lot of like the former Soviet Union's weapons in Ukraine as a part of this program. So here we go with this video, the origins of the CTR.
I was in Hungary, Budapest, Hungary, at a conference, and it was a conference about the Soviet Union, and there were people from the Soviet Union there, including a friend of mine who later, under Yeltsin, became deputy defense minister by the name of Andrei Kokoshin. He came to the conference a day or two early and left because there was a coup against Gorbachev. That was August of '91. I got there about the time he was leaving, and into the conference, which lasted 3 or 4 days, I got a phone call from him because Yeltsin was basically defying the takeover against Gorbachev. And Kokoshin had been called back, and Gorbachev had by that time been released. So a lot happened in those 2 or 3 days. But he asked me to come to Russia, and he used the term Russia several times, not the Soviet Union, and it still was the Soviet Union. And I said, oh, I have no passport, I have no visa, I have nothing. I had a passport, not a visa. And he said, I'll have the Russian ambassador in your hotel in Budapest in about 45 minutes. And I laughed. I said, you all can't, your bureaucracy is much slower than ours. You can't do anything in 45 minutes. He said, be in the lobby in 45 minutes. You'll have your credentials to get there. So I basically went downstairs, and to my great shock, the ambassador did show up, and he did have my credentials. Long story short, I caught a train to Frankfurt and flew to Moscow. And in the Frankfurt airport, the American ambassador from Moscow called me and said, "Don't come. It's bedlam over here. We have no way to take care of you. We have no way to arrange meetings. We have no way to provide security." I said, "Well, I'll take my chances because I'm going to have Russian friends on the ground to take me around." And so, again, long story short, I went to Moscow. I stayed 3 days. I saw what was going on. I talked to a number of the military people, both those that were lined up with Yeltsin and those that were remnants of the Soviet Union. I sat in a fascinating meeting where the heads of the republics, including Gorbachev, who by that time had been released from coup, and he was presiding over a meeting of the heads of the republics, and they were debating the breakup of the Soviet Union. So I sat there all one day and listened to the breakup, and putting all that together was an unbelievable amount of information. But the bottom lines were pretty clear. The Soviet Union was breaking up, and they were breaking up with the largest store of nuclear weapons, a biological program at least. They denied the weapon part of it, and huge stockpiles of chemical weapons. The danger was clear. Their own military leaders knew they had to have assistance and help. And so to me, it was urgent. It was apparent. And we had a vital stake, not just the United States, but the world had a vital stake in helping out in that situation to the extent that they would permit help in that situation. And so some of those questions obviously were unknown, but that's where the idea of what became known as the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program or the Non-Luger Program came from. Dick Combs and I came up with it on the airplane coming back from Moscow. And of course, it was a rough outline. We had to put it in legislative form. We had to convince the people in the Senate to begin with. And the answer is the first draft was Nunn and Combs. And of course, Senator Lugar joined in at a later stage and was absolutely crucial to getting the legislation passed. But at that stage, Rob, we were in conference. We had passed the Senate Armed Services Bill. I was chair of the committee. Les Aspin was chair of the House Committee. So we were in conference on the bill. It was not a bill waiting to be approved. And so we had to add provisions in the conference report. So we put what later became known as the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program in the conference report. Les Aspin wanted to make sure we had emergency food and medical aid for the Soviet Union. He was focused on that aspect. I was focused on the weapons and the materials and the personnel who knew how to make weapons but didn't know how to feed their families. So that was my focus. His focus was on the humanitarian side. And of course, we put those two pieces together and we brought out the conference report, which went to the floor of the Senate, which went to the floor of the House. Put it mildly, all hell broke loose when we brought that provision back, because here we were offering aid to our adversary of the last 40 years in a country that could destroy us. So it took a lot of explaining, and the explanation was not good enough to begin with. So the whole bill was jeopardized. Technically, although the legislation was essential, technically it was out of scope. The opponents, critics, were correct on that. So we basically took that provision out and went on and passed the bill. And so I went to my friend Dick Lugar. He and I worked together on a number of things. And I said, Dick, I want to talk to you about this concept. We need your help. And so he was very, very smart. He understood what was going on. He kept up with it. And he and I formed a partnership then. And we started to work on individual senators, 2, 3, 4 at a time, and members of the House, that this was absolutely urgent legislation and that it was in America's vital interest. It was our security at stake. We did not want Russian scientists in North Korea and Iran and Iraq and Libya. And that was where the situation was headed, in my view.
Well, when the Soviet Union fell, there were, by some estimates, 35,000 nuclear warheads spread across the former Soviet Union. Let's say 22,000 of those or so were tactical warheads, and the rest were strategic warheads. And those ended up being on the territories of Belarus, Kazakhstan, and in Ukraine. And so none of those countries, after thinking about it for a while, wanted to have those weapons. So they had to be returned. They had to be secured. Where were they going to go? And so anything goes, everything might be for sale. And so you wanted to be able to get control of that material, those warheads, that material, those launch systems, and make sure that they didn't fall into the wrong hands.
At that time, the mission was to remove the warheads from Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Ukraine, ship them back to Russia. We had agreed with the Russians that that would be the best way to dispose of the excess warheads. So the very first mission was to take armored blankets. These are Kevlar type blankets, protect against small arms fire and fires while warheads are in transportation. And the Russians didn't have that kind of protection, so we got them out of Army reserves, excess material.
I came to work for DNA in 1996. I was assigned to the Nuclear Weapons Storage Facility program. And along with that, there was material protection control and accounting, all kind of around what we were going to do or what the Russians were going to do with the material that came out of weapons that were being returned to them from Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan for dismantlement.
We were really facilitators and supporters, but it was the first time we actually got to engage with the Russians face to face. It was the first physical mission where we delivered something, which I think was really important to get the program started.
My first project in CTR was in spent submarine fuel. So as a submarine officer, I think it was logical to put me there. And so I spent a year and a half working with the Russian Federation on spent nuclear fuel transportation. And this is something that's been a part of the CTR program for a long time. Russian submarines run on highly enriched fuel, which could be for other things other than submarine fuel. So our team worked with Russian scientists to transport that fuel to the reprocessing center in Mayak in Russia.
The former Soviet Union had a very, very large bioweapons program. They employed, somewhere in the range of 70,000 scientists and technicians. And it wasn't just in Russia itself. It was in the stands also, and, Georgia and everywhere else. At the time we got there, they hadn't been funded well in years. There was a great worry. There was always worry about where would these former bioweapon scientists and techs go. There was a Defense Science Board study back in, I'm going to say 94, 95. It's in the history books. I just don't remember the exact date. And it's loosely entitled How to Keep Former Soviet Bioweapon Scientists Off the Street. And the simple answer was engage them, pull them into projects where they can get money into their institutes, keep their people fed, keep them there so they don't get lured away by Syria, Iran, North Korea, something like that. So the project focused on that. We worked to shore up the safety and security at the bio facilities that they would let us into so things could not be stolen or accidentally released. We tried to upgrade the way they were doing science a little bit so that they could do peer-reviewed articles and get published. The institutes, most of them were in a shambles, quite honestly, when we got there in the late 90s and early 2000s. And so that was the goal. It was to engage these scientists, keep them where they were, keep them happy, leverage their knowledge, because the Soviet Union did some very, very cool science work that we just never did in the West, that might have, prophylactic and medical value to the troops and to the nation, writ large. So that was the purpose initially of biosafety, biosecurity, and cooperative research projects.
We bring in the Soviet scientists in the 90s, developed this biological weapons program. Next thing you know, we start releasing biological agents, and you start seeing, there's anthrax breakouts, there's Ebola breakouts, there's Zika breakouts, there's SARS and coronavirus breakouts happening all across the United States. And this is not even like the H5N1, the H1N1, this is where gain of function research pretty much comes from. We bring all these scientists in, and we start creating new diseases along with vaccines so we can start making some money. And I guess while we're taking a break here from this video, just to highlight Michael Callahan's involvement in this program. I have here this was like a little hearing they had in July 2005. Engineering bioterror agents, lessons from the offensive U.S. and Russian biological weapons programs. And if you do a little word search in here, one of my favorite things to do while I'm doing some research, one of the witnesses on the panel, is this on the screen right now? Yep. Just so happens to be Dr. Michael Callahan, and he's working alongside Dr. Calabac and Dr. Roger Brent. And part of Callahan's testimony, if you go down to his statement, sorry, give me 1 second here. These things can be a little bit. Prepared statement of Dr. Michael Callahan. So I am a staff physician in the Division of Infectious Diseases at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, and the Director of Biological Threat Defense at the Center for Integration of Medicine and Innovation Technology, CIMIT. CIMIT is a multi-institution nonprofit research organization funded by the U.S. government to identify near-term solutions for critical military and civilian medical problems. Now, this is while Callahan, in the early 2000s, he was also like head of like one of DARPA's programs involving like improving, what was it called? Animal proofing the war fighter. They were trying to make it so the United States military war fighters could like hold their breath longer underwater and in high altitudes, that they could do very quick like vaccine, and they were applying the what were they, the chips, some type of chip on their arm where they could follow them around and read the biomedical information while they're in battle. So it was a lot of like cutting edge military stuff, and Michael Callahan was head of this program, as well as bringing in these Russian scientists at the same time. I don't know how he got all this work done, actually. He probably had a lot of CIA partners helping him out that aren't listed in these programs. But here we continue. Since January 2002, I have also worked with the U.S. Department of State, in particular with the Bioindustry Initiative. Now, this is where the Soviets come into play. A program which uses the U.S. biotechnology market and academic collaborations to redirect former Soviet biological weapon scientists to peaceful, sustainable medical research. So they took these offensive Soviet weapon scientists and they put them in the universities in the United States, North Carolina, UTMB, Penn State. They put them in corporations like Pfizer and GSK. They set them up with some cush jobs. Sorry, I lost my spot. Prior to this position, I was on the faculty at the Center for International Health at Boston University, where I served as clinical investigator for tropical medicine research projects in sub-Saharan Africa. I currently maintain tropical disease research activities in 5 developing countries, which is pertinent to the discussion below. This is where some SARS can come into play, some tropical diseases, doing some bat bat poo research in China there, Mr. Callahan? With EcoHealth Alliance. He was involved in like EcoHealth, like the American division. So, he's got a lot of connections. Since the October 2001 anthrax attack, I have worked with the biological terrorism working groups from the National Academy of Science, the Department of Defense, and the Department of Homeland Security. My focus areas are risk analysis of small-scale biological weapon production and consequence management following mass casualty infections and poisonings. This is pretty much what he was doing in China. He's DARPA's man in Wuhan, following mass casualty infections and poisonings when the SARS virus pandemic broke out in Wuhan, China. Michael Callahan was a man on the scene monitoring everything. And this is where he said famotidine was one of the therapeutics we should start using based off of his time in China. This subcommittee and his work with Robert Malone. He sent Robert Malone the sample to be put through the domain system. So they have a nice little link together as well. This subcommittee has asked that I provide some perspective on the threat of engineered biological weapons, as there is considerable debate about several aspects of biological weapons. I have attempted to support this testimony with photographs from the field and from laboratory modeling activities. I will emphasize here that I am not an expert on former U.S. biological weapons program that was disbanded in 1971. I also understand that Dr. Alabek will provide testimony on the Soviet biological weapons program under Biopreparat. My reference to the FSU program will therefore be restricted to information gained from ongoing research collaborations with ex-biological weapons scientists from 10 Russian institutes. It should be emphasized that my experience helping BII, the Bioindustry Initiative, to develop drug and vaccine commercialization opportunities for former weapons scientists have resulted in access to several institutions previously closed to Westerners, aka all the labs that are in modern day Ukraine. Further transparency is gained, perhaps ironically, Kazakhstan as well. By relationships forged from medical care of former weapons. All right, I'm not going to continue reading on this part. But here we have next the Bioindustry Initiative. I wasn't even going to get into this stuff. I don't know how I did. But yeah, here's the Bioindustry Initiative from the U.S. Department of State, talking about bringing in those former weapons scientists. And if you put Massachusetts General Hospital in here, that's where Dr. Callahan is from, highlighted right there in that CIMMIT program that he was head of. It's listed on under the Accelerating Vaccine Development. So Massachusetts General Hospital was involved in bringing in former Soviet scientists, and they established them in the Accelerating Vaccine Development programs. So is it a coincidence that Dr. Michael Callahan was also head of DARPA's AMP, Accelerating Vaccine Manufacturing Program at DARPA at the same time, which I think later on it gets twists and turns with the title a little bit, but this Accelerating Vaccine Development becomes Operation Warp Speed eventually. So there's your Dr. Michael Callahan CTR connection. I'm going to go back to this video here.
We also had projects to eliminate stuff. Stepnogorsk was an elimination project. I mean, we greenfielded that place, pretty much eliminated all production capability that they had, destroyed the fermenters, destroyed the lyophilizers, the freeze dryers, just everything. And in doing so, we kept all the scientists there engaged in destruction work and turned them into construction kind of guys and safety guys and asbestos removal guys and stuff like that. So they all had a paycheck. They all stayed up and stepped in the course. So that was worthwhile.
Relationship was very professional. I would say formal, but in a sort of informal way. And that is, it was based on our positions and our knowledge and capabilities, not based on our personalities. So while we got to know each other, it was always based on, look, we're responsible for the safety and security of nuclear warheads. This is not, we're not here to be friends. We're here because we're concerned about that, and both of us are concerned about that.
All of us on the team, different teams, I think formed really strong professional bonds, and in some cases very personable bonds with the principal investigators and the staff and their colleagues that worked with them and worked with us and the commercial partners really closely on those particular programs.
The scientists at Rosatom, I thought, were good partners. We collectively geeked out over the details on the design and the requirements, and that provided a common bond. One of my trips to Murmansk, they invited us up to the Lenin, which the Lenin is the first nuclear surface ship, was a nuclear icebreaker that was commissioned by the Russians. And of course, they still have a fleet of nuclear icebreakers that they have in active service. But the officer that toured us on the Lenin was actually the engineer for over 20 years. So he had some amazing stories about being out at sea on the ice, and operating in those incredibly austere conditions, and we kind of bonded on the nuclear operations side too. So on a personal level, I think we had we found connections, as people often do when you have a common background and a common purpose.
Most of our original engagement in Russia was cooperative research projects. And most of those drove us to do biosecurity and biosafety upgrades at the various institutes. But like I said, every place was different. So Vector, which is what their big part of their bioweapons program, one of the 2 smallpox repositories in the world, CDC being the other one, but I mean, it was a heavy duty bioweapons facility, testing, production and stuff. So they were much more standoffish. I met their director, Lev Sendachev, back in the day, and you can look him up. He's in all the old bioweapons books and stuff. I mean, and he was cordial enough and a nice enough guy, but he had his agenda and he had his direction from up above on what they would share and what they would not share. So we helped them with safety and security, which was needed. We helped them do some conversion. We shifted one of their old production lines into a yogurt production line, like the little Activa liquid stuff that for probiotic purposes. It was called Bifido. This is stuff. And so we tried to do some defense conversion with them. We did research projects that were beneficial, but they were also a little bit standoffish. A different place, RCMDT, the Research Center for Molecular Diagnostics and Therapy, which is in Moscow. These guys were entrepreneurs. I mean, they were open, they were getting patents, they were developing diagnostic tools based on, research projects that we funded. They were your snazzy salesmen, So they were always open and kind of only asked for what they needed. And they managed their projects very well, and they turned them into other revenue streams, which I always thought was very cool. And they were nice, super friendly. Galitsino was an agricultural pathogen facility, true bioweapons site. Some of the nicest guys in the world. For years, I still got Christmas cards from them at home. And they always reached out. They sent me birthday emails and stuff like that. Super positive guys. Their facility had just been left in a total shambles. All their greenhouses fell apart, and they really didn't have a lot of work. So we helped them get a few projects going, improve their pathogen security and their repository, and they were thrilled by the little bit of love and attention that we showed them, and they were very, very gracious people. But in my heart, I believe all of them were pretty open to the cooperation that we were trying to make happen. And they wanted to be good scientists, and they wanted to contribute to the bigger picture, and they wanted to be known.
On the Ministry of Defense side, similarly, I think there were individuals with which I was, able to make a connection, and they were genuinely interested in improving the condition of their country. And there were some that were more standoffish and weren't really interested in making a relationship. So I'm sure the same was true on both sides. But as we came closer.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, give me a thumbs up when you're ready there, Mr. Webb. He is ready. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the man of the half hour that you've all been waiting for, Mr. George Webb. George, thank you for joining Live with Andy. How you doing this afternoon?
Hey, Andy, I'm a little bit guilty here, being 10 minutes late. I apologize. But that's just the way the world is sometimes.
Hey, I got no complaints here, Mr. Webb, so you don't have to apologize at all. I've been doing a little kind of just highlighting the United States cooperation with the former Soviet scientists and bringing them into our biological weapons programs. And I did a little Michael Callahan pinpoint with a bioindustry initiative, and the Massachusetts General Hospital bringing in some of those Russian scientists as well into some of their programs. So it's I'm just trying to improve on the George Webb foundation that you've laid with all your work in your books over the past couple of years.
Well, that's great, Andy. I mean, it's the most fascinating story that keeps taking these twists and turns. So it's now we have huge truckloads of artwork, priceless artwork from China and Africa and India being unloaded on Bob Malone's boss's doorstep. That doesn't happen every day in the middle of coronavirus. And this person isn't new just in July 2020 with all this artwork for Nick Jacobs. They all go back to the original Anthrax 911. So, when I see you, I think of Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And because you got your Texas hat, and it reminds me of all the things I wrote down in Rock Island Virus, and what was the other book I wrote about it? But anyway, I had a partner task
Slaughterpen, Texas. You had as well.
Texas, and it was based on the idea that
I'll be going to Hale County tomorrow, by the way.
Oh, wow. Wouldn't it be interesting if that's IB Hale, named after IB Hale? Wow. God, Conair rockets and General Atomics and General Dynamics and F-111s. Geez, it's great stuff. But
so who had artwork dropped off on their doorstep? You're saying, was this Galloway or
no? Bob Malone's boss, Nick Jacobs, at the Winburr Monkey Lab, Winburr Research Institute, by his own description, not mine. Huge cask of priceless artwork. African art, European art, Asian art, Chinese art.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen every day. Plus, we find out, well, just getting back to, this is what about Bob and some of the, he says he worked there at Winburr. You can see it right there. Uniform services.
Right there.
Yeah, these are the people that come, the Winburr paramedics that go out there. You can see they don't have any kind of moon suits or anything.
Mm-hmm.
They spend all day out there, and then they come back to the Winburr Medical Center. And my key question is, do they test them for anthrax? Because The morning of the anthrax, Bob Malone's boss was meeting with a Mossad agent saying, we think your lab should do anthrax testing. And then all the people come back with anthrax signs. So we have congressional hearings all that summer expecting anthrax tests.
Mm-hmm.
We have a crash site here that's not a polluted crash site like the other crash sites with the Pentagon and the two towers. So here's a pristine crash site where we can go in and see if we detected the anthrax or not. But as soon as you start asking questions about this with Bob Malone, because he was there by his own testimony in federal court, he starts accusing you of doing 9/11. You know, he's literally accusing me and my brother of doing 9/11 through a third party by retreating him. And he starts accusing me of killing my partner. And my partner, if you remember what she said, was her explanation of why some people had the Gulf War syndrome overseas, but then some people had Gulf War syndrome but didn't go overseas. But they did go to Texas. And they did go to Port Arthur, the disembarkation point of the, I can't remember which army, the air cavalry, you know, the guys with the pony on their thing, first air cav. And
I forgot the name of it. You talked about them quite a bit.
First Air Cavalry. But this is his description of what happened on 9/11. And anyway, her theory was, well, not her theory, her reporting from people in the special forces involved in those missions was they were not, this wasn't a reaction to the anthrax vaccine. They were exposed to the anthrax a form of anthrax before in the training areas in Texas.
Okay,
as well as over in Iraq.
So there's two forms of anthrax, correct? There's like one that's like super deadly and one that's not, that they test with, correct?
Well, there's what's called an edema factor that causes bleeding, and then there's a lethal factor, which is the drop dead disease.
Okay.
So you had all those cattle out there in Texas that you went out to on your, which I love, Andy, by the way. You know.
Yeah, at the cattle ranch I forgot the name of the one that burnt down the street.
Yeah, but they said all these cattle dropped there, and you went out there, and they go, I don't see any cattle. You know,
18,000 cattle died. It's like, where are they at?
but the anthrax was originally cultured in the weapons with cattle in Texas. So if you look at the Ames variety, the weaponized version that was in the attacks at Fort Detrick, in the Congress, and the ones that killed the people in Florida, that actually came from a steer from Texas in the 80s. This anthrax thing goes back to the 80s with Texas cattle. And maybe this is the reason George Bush has such a big cattle ranch.
That definitely makes sense. And what? So we have Bob Malone, we have this Nick Jacobs, and I went to the Starks, what is it, the Starksville crash site or Shanksville crash site in Pennsylvania, and it was pretty tragic. I've heard some local stories about the plane. They said it, like, some of the kids were playing, they said it was upside down and stuff. But yeah, we have this storyline of 9/11, and then this coinciding storyline of anthrax at the same time. And it's almost like Bush had to pick and choose which is he going to go with, like the weapons of mass destruction, or is he going to go with the biological weapons? And they went with both for, I guess, a little bit there. It seems like they just started the biological weapons programs, but they also went full bore into the weapons of mass destruction. And It just seems like there's a lot going on at this time frame. And is 9/11 used to cover up these anthrax attacks, or is it like the other way around, do you think?
I think it's the other way around. I think what happened was, I don't know if somebody went out there in that picture at Shanksville Redemption and got a baggie and a test tube and then sent it to Washington, D.C., Walter Reed, and then it was presented in a Senate testimony to say, hey, the hijackers had weaponized anthrax. Therefore, we can't tell the American public, it'll panic the American public, but we need to attack Saddam Hussein, otherwise he's going to hit your hometown with a plane. And it's not going to be, we got him this time because Dov Zakheim, the System Planning Corporation, SPC, we had this capability from the Israelis where we were able to take these planes down before they hit anything really big. And the last plane was coming for you guys in the Congress, and we pulled it down. We didn't have a choice. And we pulled it down, and we pulled it down near Windber. And that's why I think the Israeli agent that was meeting, the former Israeli agent that was meeting with Bob Malone's boss was Dov Zakheim. Now, nobody's been able to tell me where Dov Zakheim was on 9/11.
How do you spell Zakheim?
Zakheim. There's also a Roger Zakheim, who was at the CIA's version of DARPA, which is the kind of covert weapons DARPA.
Mm-hmm.
And Roger, it could have been Roger Zakheim as well. There's
so what's the covert DARPA? There's a
it's called IARPA, which is Intelligence Agency Advanced Research Projects, but that's where all the covert stuff happens. And Bob was a member of the same group of people that were in IARPA. Stephen Hatfill, Bob Gallo, Daryl Galloway, Daryl Rickey.
That's who I named the show after. Stephen Hatfield's middle name is Jay, so I went Jay and Not So Silent Bob Strike Back.
Well, that could be a lot truer than we know. Yeah, that could be a lot truer than we know. Well, anyway, Task Force said that there was this guy, just to remind everybody what Task Force in the research, and this goes back to 2017, before the pandemic. But what she had said was Javid was doing water. He had a line of like Sweetwater liquors.
Mm-hmm.
He had the cattle. He had the cattle ranch in Port Arthur. He had the cigarette vape.
Mm-hmm.
He had the illegal cigarettes sold through convenience stores in all the places the special forces were in the South. And he also had CBD. And he was also the CEO of Riceland Hospitals. That's him.
To hear Javid.
Yeah. And number one contributor, Hillary Clinton. And she felt he was a Rothschild sellout, and he was taking all the.
That's all you need to know right there.
Yeah, he was taking all the checks. She thought Pakistani ISI intelligence. He was connected with the drug lab that Rahm Emanuel owned, and they were farming all these medical records back through ISI to Mossad, and they were testing all these Mossad weapons on American GIs and VA. You see, these things don't make any sense. Starco right there is doing all these vapes.
And then he owns like the hospitals who are doing like all the vape studies.
Yeah. Like how could that be? How could a CEO of a hospital be the same guy? Is he Riceland Farms, where they're raising all these cattle, and she thought he was doing anthrax and all that. Now, she didn't understand. She never told me that it was a binary secondary. A lot of people, the other book was Heavy Metal Virus, which was using nanoparticles and using poisons and putting poisons on nanoparticles. But she didn't understand that anthrax was a binary weapon, and that I could primary, or it doesn't matter the order, primary, secondary, but I could spray you at a Trump rally, and I could spray you at January 6th, and I could spray you with the primary, and then I could give everybody the secondary through vaccination. It's only when you combine the primary and the secondary that it becomes lethal or edemic.
Mm-hmm.
So now the way I would do it, if I was Stephen Hatfield, or if I was, a really horrible person like Donald Rumsfeld, I would spray the pore making ability so that everybody had the pores in all their key organs. And basically those are like nail holes waiting to just, be finished. Those some molly bolts that the nail's already ready. Mm-hmm. All you need to do is just hit it with a hammer. And that way anybody could be a target. Right. And then you come in later with a lethal factor. You come in later with the edema factor. And the key hallmark of cattle that have anthrax poisoning is they drop dead right in their tracks. This died suddenly thing.
They just boom, just go down?
It's known, the expression dropping dead came from anthrax poisoning. If you remember those original films of China where they said they faked them later on, but people were dropping dead just like the cattle that had anthrax, it was a lot more in concert with the symptoms of anthrax. And you mentioned, did they have to choose between the anthrax and the coronavirus? They actually combined the two. It's called the Coronathrax. Whitney Webb wrote about it. It's called Engineering a Pandemic. So they actually combined the two. So you could run this sudden death. You see that?
Mm-hmm. The most common sign of anthrax infection in animals is sudden death. Prior to death, animals may have a fever, muscle tremors, and difficulty breathing. There may be bleeding from the mouth, nose, anus after death. So it's all of a sudden they get it and they're just down and out.
But see, these people, these young men that are dying in these soccer games or long distance, where there's a lot of running, basketball is another one, as you know, you don't see them. They whisk those guys away. And a lot of this is why I think Stu got sold a bill of goods, from, and I think Dr. Jane Ruby got sold a bill of goods on this because a long calamari thing in your blood would easily be seen by a radiologist way before it ever got that long when you started having trouble breathing. It wouldn't cause sudden death like this. And this is why when I saw those things come out, I'm not saying Jane's involved in this. I'm not saying Stu's involved in this. I think they got fooled. But those are sure signs when you have cover stories start coming up. Those are sure signs that they're trying to cover something like this. Because it makes no sense whatsoever. The died suddenly documentaries made no sense whatsoever.
And what are I guess I don't know how to phrase this exactly. So how exactly did they use anthrax for like SARS coronavirus studies? I know they've done some work incorporating them together. Do you know all that off the top of your head? Okay.
Yes. So a bacteria, right? The way bacteria, kind of evolve is different things called phages. This is how they discovered bacteriophages. Were viruses that could go into the genome of a bacteria and change its genome. And you can actually insert coronavirus into a bacteria like anthrax. That way, later on, it could express even the spike protein. That way, later on, when you swab the upper nasal cavities, you get the person's DNA as well, and it's going to test positive because it's creating the spike protein. It's the perfect cover for anthrax. Because you're not testing for the anthrax, you're testing for the coronavirus. And it's the same thing when you PCR. You PCR it enough, it's going to test for the coronavirus. You're not testing for anthrax. Anthrax requires you to do a swab initially, but you have to have a thing on there that's called antisense that senses the anthrax. So it has to be you have to test for it. Which nobody was ready to do. And then you have to then PCR it and amplify it and then grow it in a petri dish.
Is this why you had all those like false tests initially, like when the FDA was putting out like the new SARS tests and stuff? Is like the first batch they gave out was bad and didn't work, and it was just like giving false numbers to the people pretty much.
This is why ketchup and mayonnaise and all these other things tested positive, because they were going 45 spins when I think recommended was 20 something. Because you don't want to smear everything against the wall. You want to use the centrifuge to separate things by weight. And then you figure out what weight band that you're looking for, and you trap at that, and that's how you make the identification. So no one, it's the perfect crime because nobody's looking for what you're looking for. And you've put out a solution to the test before it ever occurs. You know what's going to happen. And a whole bunch of people, we studied these murders. Yeah, if you look at, this is.
I'm not sure if this is exact. This is like the release, some study the DTRA did on the release of helpful viruses, and they start getting into your phages and anthrax.
Phage is basically a virus that goes and infects a bacteria.
Okay.
But the way Bruce Ivans from Fort Detrick originally came up, I think, with the gamma phage test, which is basically you can go in with a virus and disable a bacteria. So it makes for the perfect weapon because I can infect everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like Matt Pottinger's father, Stan Pottinger, the Final Solution virus. Go ahead and infect everybody, and everybody's going to die. Now I selectively decide who's going to live by sending in the gamma phage.
Mm-hmm.
And then the bacteria no longer divides. You got to do it early, though, because otherwise there'll be a whole bunch of other ones that keep growing. But this is the idea that I think if you look at all the people surrounding Bob Malone, they're all anthrax guys. They're really not coronavirus guys. The odd man out is Ralph Barrick, and he's
the only one. He just solely focuses on coronavirus.
Yeah, but they're all remdesivir guys.
Mm-hmm.
And I had on Rixey, Colonel or Charles Rixey. I keep wanting to call him Colonel Rixey. But he had talked a lot about anthrax. He said fern cleavage sites for anthrax have been around way before fern cleavage sites, which are still a telltale sign of engineering. They were around with anthrax way before they were around for coronavirus.
Okay, so bringing in these Soviet scientists, the Ken Alabak and like BioPreparat, Michael Callahan, bringing all these guys, how important is that in the story? Should I kind of drop that side of things? Because I think that's when like all of this kind of starts picking up steam in my opinion.
No, that's right on the money, because those are the people they bring in. And see, the thing is, they have to hide these scientists. They can't have Soviet scientists running around Washington, D.C., or running around Emory, or running around UCLA or Stanford. You got 40 bioweapon scientists. They're all speaking in Russian to each other, right outside of the Pentagon.
That's kind of what I think Robert Malone might be, is like an undercover Soviet scientist that they're just
I don't
he kind of has that look to me. Like he kind of looks like Kolomoisky's from that. Like he has that like kind of curly Jufro thing going on. It's like I'm
in a lawsuit with him, so I don't think that's true. But a lot of the people he works with certainly fit that description in Alachua, Florida. They're all ex-bioweapon scientists. Exactly as you just said, Andy, and it's always in these way remote locations, close to universities and the testing equipment. But if you look at the little town of Windber, where Bob Malone was on 9/11, at least that's what his resume says, there's 4,200 people in the town. It's got, in 92, it has 38 PhDs. I don't know how many PhDs it had at 9/11, but he said he went on a hiring spree. So this is the perfect place to have all your Russians. It's like when I went to Centerville in Maryland,
Mm-hmm.
everybody in the town spoke Russian.
How far away is this from Fort Detrick?
It probably would be about 350 miles. I'm thinking this is about 100 miles. When we went to Gettysburg, I know you guys all went to Shanksville. Probably, I'm guessing 150, 200 miles from Gettysburg.
Okay. Well, that's starting to because Penn. So you have Fort Detrick right there, and Penn State University is actually involved in a lot of these.
Yep.
A lot of these biological weapons programs as well. So that you are right. This would be like right in the middle of things, and can be like a little short train drive away to wherever you need to get to go.
Yeah, it's about 45 minutes from Penn State. It's about an hour and change to UPMC. But this isn't speculation of putting the coronavirus into the anthrax for coronathrax. If you Google coronathrax and UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, that's where all the dead bodies are. We got 3 dead bodies. I call them Bing, Bing, Bing because, somebody shooting a weapon, Bing, Bing, Bing. Bing was just the first guy who got killed. There was a gal, and then there was another one, and who I always forget the name of. But these were people who died just as coronavirus was breaking out. Yeah, this is my Henry Kissinger Substack that I do.
It sent me. That's where it put me on your.
Oh, it did. Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
That's where coronathrax unless I think I might have spelled Winber wrong, maybe.
BER Winber.
Mago cryo. I don't even know what that.
But if you put in coronathrax and then engineering a pandemic, you should get Whitney Webb, UPMC. See where it says unlimited hangout, Corona Origins.
Am I missing it?
I don't know.
It's Evil Origins right here.
Yeah, try that one.
Concocting gain-of-function aerosols like coronathrax, airborne Ebola, and pig coronavirus that could soon be leaking from labs everywhere. And it just, here's your what is that? Your anti-tank missile system. I
love this. Who wrote this?
This is Tim Duff. Whoever Tim Duff is.
I like it.
Sorry, I like that. I do like
coronavirus is the first picture. Oh, they're all of coronavirus. Can you read a little of that, Andy, where he starts talking about coronathrax?
Let's see. You want me to read the whole thing or just
a little bit wherever they mention coronathrax
right.
Or UPMC? Can you search for UPMC?
Give me 1 second. That's the title. The maniacal scientists genetically engineering pathogens to make them even more deadly are now out of control, concocting gain-of-function aerosols like coronathrax, airborne Ebola, and pig coronavirus that could soon be leaking from labs everywhere. In 2014, the Pentagon's DARPA established a biological technologies office. DARPA has revealed reluctantly programmed prophecy, a project to predict all the ways a pathogenic virus might mutate to sequence and synthesize viral genomes to test how they adapt and change in various hosts and to create high energy evolutionary boundaries that keep genetic mutations at bay. They also have the DARPA Insect Allies project, which uses virus-infected insects to genetically engineer crops while they are growing, a horizontal genetic alteration system. The DARPA program called Preventing Emerging Pathogenic Threats, Preempt, which you've done a lot of work on, a process to disrupt the cross-species jump of viruses involving animal or insect targeted vaccines, gene editors, and therapeutic interfering particles. You want me to keep going here? I'm not sure how much. I don't think
I'm
they
good.
do.
I think the part I like about there is there another mention of Coronathrax in the
There
article?
is not. It's just
Okay.
a couple in the title there.
Well, this what's his name again? This is a good.
That was Tim Duff
Tim
from
Duff.
LA.
Good on you, Tim Duff. I'd like to meet you. You've got a lot of juice, man. Good work.
I think he might be taking some George Webb juice there.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. I don't mind. I don't care. I think it's great. This is good. Is this another Tim Duff?
This is gain of function ghouls SARS-CoV-2. I got to put Coronathrax in here. Coronathrax, an invention of the University of Pittsburgh's Center for Vaccine Research that combines SARS-CoV-2 with anthrax. It's completely unnecessary and frankly bizarre, Edward Hammond told Whitney Webb for her article. Okay, I think that's her article that you're looking for. Finally, I found it.
I like it. I like
I
it.
found her article, but I'll keep reading this part.
This is good. He's good though. Tim Duff. I like him.
Engineering contagion UPMC Coronathrax in the darkest winter. No one would know about this coronavirus anthrax chimera if Hammond hadn't been keeping labs on recombinant DNA research by doggedly filing requests for information with the Institutional Biosafety Committee of Research, U.S. Research Labs. It's terrifying, but not surprising. The Pitt Center would be doing such risky experiments, as Webb reports. Its director, W. Paul Duprex, is a gain-of-function enthusiast who's received significant funding from the Pentagon's Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And they got more about airborne Ebola and human pork vomit virus, which sounds absolutely disgusting.
Hey Andy, you got a troll. And I just want to say that you're allowed as a roving reporter to declare your domicile, the place that you do business. You may visit a lot of different places in your reports, but where you declare your domicile and conduct your business, which is Florida for me, is a matter of record for the court. So you're spreading false information, so you should stop. But anyway, that's AB. So
yeah, I just blocked AB. Antonio, we all know Antonio Brown's a fool in the NFL anyway.
Yeah. Andy, half of these
you should file your business in Delaware like everyone else, George Webb. Would you?
Well, I mean,
get those tax breaks.
Yeah, I know. 2 years though, I've been going back and forth in between, and because I did so much in Florida, I think I got in trouble a little bit in a case here with CNN. They said, "No, you don't live here; you live in Florida." So, how do you win these things? You know, they want you to. But that was the whole CNN case. They said because you live in the same state and you spend a lot of time in the same state as CNN, you don't have a diversity of citizenship. So, you can't please everybody. So go ahead. What's this one, Andy?
So we were speaking about the Soviet scientists being brought over into the United States and like dispersed into all their like bioweapons programs, and we're starting to dig into the universities like UPMC. You've mentioned University of Florida and Maryland and University of Texas and stuff, and part of this what I'm kind of getting at is maybe we put some of these Soviet scientists into our universities here in the United States, because as you can see here, the DTRA has definitely been working with them, and it's called the University Research Alliance. And they've given them multiple contracts, but here in 2020 they gave them a nice $51.5 million boost. And if you look here at like the little University of Michigan, Penn State, University of Florida, Berkeley, over here is like Johns Hopkins, UC San Diego. So it's all the universities that we've been digging into with this DTRA, and they use some of these universities to develop the domain project as well. Like the University of Washington was used. I know they use like Los Alamos lab. So they definitely disperse some of these scientists into our universities here in the United States. So if you're in the biolabs and you hear a ski or something at the end of your teacher's name, they might be from the Soviet Union.
Well, you mentioned domain, and this Wattendorf guy who's the protege of Bob Malone turns out to be the guy who ran Operation Warp Speed and was really behind a lot of this gain of function stuff and for the warfighter. And I'm not saying that's not necessarily bad, but one of the universities was Vanderbilt. I didn't know domain was at University of Washington. That's helpful. And then there's two other ones that we want to identify. But again, why not be honest and open? Was it all these universities working on like 4 different teams like they do for the X Prize?
Mm-hmm.
We don't know, but we tend to find out. Again, Bob Malone is the one who opened the door on this by accusing me of 9/11. Now I get to ask him where he was on 9/11, because what it looks like is he's projecting his guilt on me. And likewise, when he says I'm stalking him because I'm asking him questions about domain, well, that allows me to ask all the questions about domain to see if I was telling the truth or not.
Mm-hmm.
If I really was trying to out a program which was going to subvert the will of the American people, then that's my defense. So I'm now allowed to ask questions in my defense. So these accusations might not necessarily be the smartest way to go for Bob.
Yeah, I'm not sure where he's gonna go at this point. We like, I understand that I've seen some things on Twitter. It's just like, you got to separate the man from the information that he's like putting out there. That's like kind of like what some people are saying about Bob Malone, because he is like, hey, he's like, mothers and fathers, make sure you read this before you give your children the vaccine. And he is putting out some like decent stuff, and they're trying to ignore his like, and they want you to ignore his background and his connections to everything. And it's like, I just kind of find that hard to do, especially when they're he's like, he's suing people that are uncovering some of his information. It's like, what are you trying to hide? Why aren't you just upfront and honest about everything at this point?
Yeah, it really is kind of mind-boggling. We just uncovered this CIA agent named Amaryllis that works as the daughter-in-law of Robert Kennedy Jr. And she's with Cofer Black at the Counterterrorism Center. She's repeating all the same warnings I repeated, that dirty bombs are the way that terrorists would do asymmetric attacks. Missing uranium is really important. Hey, JFK Jr., ask your daughter-in-law about missing uranium at Piketon and how that really is clear and present danger to our national security. That's what she spent her career looking for. The other thing she worked on was an anthrax attack in the New York subways. Oopsie, oopsie, oopsie. I guess that's not such a wild conspiracy theory if Bobby Kennedy's daughter-in-law was working on it. Reading her book on my spaces, and she mentions AQ Khan in Pakistan, putting out these loose nukes to wacky regimes. I think I remember somebody talking about that 7 years ago. So there we go.
Yeah, this is what, like, stories like this, or like, oh, they would never release an anthrax bomb, a SARS coronavirus bomb. They would never do such a thing. And it's like, they've done it many times in the past, and they've been testing these like biological weapons on us for a long time now. And yeah, you see here the Army tested germ warfare on the New York City subway by smashing light bulbs full of bacteria. Is this where that don't break the light bulbs kind of story comes in? Like, they have poison inside of them. I never really knew that, because they said don't break them, because we are telling your kids if you found a bomb.
I think this is where the name of the band Smashing Pumpkins came from, because you remember how many of those guys died. So don't smash the pumpkins. I think the number one way of, doing bomblets was very fragile things like a light bulb. When Hanscom Air Force Base, when they were doing the fixturing for these weapons in Vietnam and Korea, so the light bulb is a perfect cover. Hey, we're just sending 10,000 light bulbs to Saigon.
That is true. All it takes is one broken light bulb, and next thing you know, there's a virus. Everyone flies home from a plane in Wuhan, and there's a virus spreading around the world.
I don't know how they did it, but that certainly could be one of the ways. All I'm saying is that if you're looking really hard, you put all the swabs out for coronavirus, it could be hiding something much more deadly. And none of the coronavirus symptoms would explain long COVID. Long COVID is much more an anthrax type of thing, where something is deep in the wells of, or tuberculosis, where it's deep in the wells of your lungs and it just stays there and you can't get rid of it. It could cause things like your situation, bleeding in the heart, where you have the pour and then the secondary is introduced and then now the bleeding. So cut your beard first thing to increase aeration. Here it says,
to get the ventilators. I need to take part in the ventilator studies.
Then go running. Then go running. You need ventilation, Andy.
I mean, if I survived, I might have been able to sue them. But here's an odd little thing. So here's this like J Stowe magazine. I'm not even sure what the J Stowe stands for, but
Joint Science and Technology Organization or something like that.
There you go. That's why you have George Webb. But this is at dtra.mil from their own website, and mentioned in this is like a little magazine, I guess they release once a month, and mentioned in their own DTRA's magazine, the search for COVID-19 therapies has led to familiar places. And what do they get into? Bob Malone's famotidine study. And they actually have his like papers right here: COVID-19, famotidine, histamine, Robert W. Malone listed at the top. And so just in case he's denying those connections, they actually like cite his work in their own magazines.
Well, one of the first things that you might do if you had anthrax poisoning is have a severe nasal tract infection, and so famotidine and also windpipe and esophagus. So famotidine might have softened the effects of that. Mm-hmm. We don't know all what happened, but our best chance is getting to these people with long COVID, getting biopsies, getting their stuff to a laboratory to see if we can find the anthrax. Because once we have the anthrax in a baggie, we have the same power that they had when they brought that baggie to Congress. Remember, when they brought the baggie to Congress, what did that give us? It got us NSA full surveillance, because we didn't have NSA full surveillance until October 4th, till Bob Stevens caught anthrax. We had 2 wars, 2 20-year wars. We had probably 7 little wars with Arab Spring. Plus we got the Patriot Act and the Department of Homeland Security. Plus we knocked down the 9/11 because it attacked the Senate. Those hearings were suspended. All from one baggie, from one test tube, potentially from Windber, Pennsylvania.
I have actually a fun little video here to show you. It's kind of digging into this stuff. It's a YouTube short. It's actually Joe Rogan had a guest, Dave Smith, on the other day, and they started talking about Wesley Clark and his role with the Bush administration after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and he gets into like the 7 countries that they're going to overthrow, and like the NATO plan. And you've done a lot of work into Wesley Clark and his role with NATO and Ukraine and stuff, so I figured I'd play it now that we're talking about it here a little bit.
This is very fucking wild.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second. He says, we've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq. I said, we're going to war with Iraq. Why? He said, I don't know. He said, I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments. So I came back to see him a few weeks later. And by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, I just got this down from upstairs from the Secretary of Defense office today. And he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
It's like insane that this was just said. How did they not talk about?
Sorry, that's the end of the clip right there. But you've done a lot of work into West Clark, and ultimately,
Well, you may remember, Andy, when I was on the border in Ukraine, it was none other than because I was going over the bombing campaigns of Wesley Clark in Sarajevo. It was none other than Wesley Clark who recommended hitting that town with a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, you know you're on General Clark's hit list because that town should be hit with a nuclear weapon.
Next thing you know, you're in Hungary. Oh, we should hit Hungary with a nuclear weapon.
You're in
Greece.
Day, when I was in that border town, that day I said, "Oh my God, this would be a." You know what? It wouldn't be a bad way to go because you wouldn't feel a thing. You just turn into vapor. So.
I guess if Mr. Brightside,
if you're close enough to the flash, you're going to be okay. Yeah.
Did you get that little? I sent you a little Twitter thing right before the show. I was doing a little research. I haven't. You know who John D. Malone is? I do not know who it is, but he's
the guy who owns the Discovery Network, and he owns CNN now. And
really,
yeah, he's the largest landowner in America as well.
He has no relations to Robert at all, because he wrote like some scientific articles right here, like U.S. military forces and emergency international humanitarian assistance, and he wrote one on anthrax as a potential biological warfare agent in '98, and then like 22 years later, he's on the USS Theodore Roosevelt during the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak. And he's in, I guess, like one of our ships, a bunch of people got infected while the Roosevelt was in Vietnam. And he was one of the people over there testing the subjects. And I was like,
wow.
If this guy has relations to Robert or is cover.
Well, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency is a part of the DIA, and DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and they have what is called cover services officers. So if you're really trying to protect, let's say, John D. Malone, and you're really trying to take people off and not find anthrax as a potential biological warfare agent,
mm-hmm.
right? That's March 1999. You come up with a different Robert Malone, and you say, we're going to introduce you, and we're going to say Robert, I think he's W. Malone, Wallace Malone. And then that's what people are going to get when they search. They're not going to find anthrax as a potential biological warfare agent. But Andy, I want all these. I talked to a couple of people on the Roosevelt, and I think when we were in San Diego, was the Lady Scripps' son, an aviator, was he on the JFK or was he on the Roosevelt?
I'm not 100% sure, George. I know he had health issues when he was on the ship, though.
Yeah, it was H5N1, or it was not H5N1. It was H5N7 or
H7N5.
Yeah, or H3N2, one of those. But he was killed by that. So maybe it was, again, you take the anthrax and then you put these viruses in there, and then you keep coming up with all kinds of different viruses so that we need the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. But it's the anthrax that keeps killing, right? And then you need to keep having more money from Congress. It's the gift that keeps on giving, and you keep using the same killer, which is anthrax.
and you can just hide it in the new diseases like coronaviruses and these new alpha noroviruses that they have coming out in the
He putting out the test kits for the different stuff. See that Egyptian plague? This goes back all the way to the Egyptians trying to fight the Romans.
Can we read a little bit of this?
Yeah, this is great.
So this is anthrax as a potential biological warfare agent, and it was written in March 1998. Anthrax is a zoonotic illness recognized since antiquity. Today, human anthrax has been all but eradicated from the industrialized world, with a vast majority of practitioners in the U.S. unlikely to have seen a case. Unfortunately, the disease remains endemic in many areas of the world, and anthrax poses a threat as a mass casualty producing weapon if used in a biological warfare capacity. Anthrax has been described for millennia, beginning with the fifth Egyptian plague, circa 1500 BC. Virgil recorded a lyrical description of anthrax in 25 BC, and the disease became known during the Middle Ages as Black Bane. In 1870s, Robert Koch demonstrated for the first time the bacterial origin of a specific disease with his studies on experimental anthrax, and also discovered the spore stage that allows persistence of the organism in the environment. Shortly afterward, John Bell recognized Bacillus anthracis as the cause of wool sorter disease, inhalation anthrax, and was instrumental in establishing wool disinfection procedures. So does this come from like shaving sheep? The disinfection measures proved effective in reducing the incidence on wool sorter disease, and they became standard in the British woolen industry. You want me to keep going?
No, I think we're good. I think we're good. You know, Aaron says that our the Brad Pitt guy was on the Roosevelt, and I think you remember Lady Scripps. She was just understandably heartbroken that her son died that way. Yeah, he was on the Roosevelt, and it makes me wonder now about Dr. Michael J. Bennett, who came to our charrette 3 or 4 different times, because he's on several Robert Malone patents. Robert Wallace Malone, Robert W. Malone, but I wonder if Lady Scripps knows about this article. This happened after. Okay, this wasn't the H5N1. Okay,
yeah,
this was
this is during COVID-19. There was a bunch of sailors that got sick, and John D. Malone, he's the only one on this paper that I guess was in charge of investigating what happened.
Wow, there you go.
I can Google Roosevelt H5N1 real quick though.
Yeah, it was this idea of you expose the primary and then hit them with the secondary later on is a powerful. It's used in all the chemical weapons, the primary and secondary. And I'm not saying you would just spray all the deplorables and all the Trump, rally and January 6ers with the secondary, and that would take care of your problem, to have warfare on the right.
Well, what if some of these soldiers were at the military games, and
that's the other thing. Yes,
they came back to the ship or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on here, but if you wanted to demonstrate this to the Chinese government, you could do no better than saying, hey, we'll show you how it'll work. We'll make all the other athletes get sick and your guys will win. People keeled over in the middle of the race. We didn't make that up.
Yeah, there's a lot of athletes that came out saying they were sick and they couldn't finish the races. And if you look at the United States finished like 14th or something like that, and it's like normally we finish first in everything, especially our military, and it's like if all of them are just like coming down with something that they're not able to perform, that would answer some of the questions.
Somebody said our budget for military athletics was 10 times greater than all the other military budgets for all the other military athletes combined.
That
And we were, like we finished way behind the Ukrainians. I think it was like 15th or 16th. We only won a couple of medals.
Okay. Oh, in this article, sorry, they're talking about past breakouts on Navy cruise ships. So it says closed. I'll put it back up on the screen.
Aaron says, should we do a Windber or charrette in June? I think that's a great idea.
I think that'd be a good idea.
It's
a nice time of year too.
Yeah, I think that sounds really great.
So here was a 2014 H3N2 outbreak with a 25% attack rate was reported in a small minesweeper with a previously vaccinated 100-member crew. There was a 3,000-member H1N1 in 2009. It is almost like they test this stuff out on the United States military and the vaccines on the ships.
Yeah, the ships are nice little petri dishes, and you can quarantine easily on ships as well. And then you can get all the stuff you need, and then let everybody get better, and then do shore leave. But the nice part about aircraft carriers is they're out to sea sometimes 6 months at a shot, so you can go through all the stuff you want.
Yeah, you can test all the vaccines out, everything.
Yeah, everything. The Navy is the way to go because you're by nature quarantined.
Yeah, yeah, you're a deserter if you try to leave. Well, I will let you go, George. You have given me an hour of your time. I do really appreciate it. Make sure you follow George. Sorry, I guess one more thing. Did you see the depleted uranium shells explosion in Ukraine? What are your what are your thoughts on that? I'll put the picture on the screen.
If you were trying to find missing uranium and people called you and said they were dying, and which is what happened to me, and then somebody intercepted you who you called deep uranium. I think I was talking about uranium if I called him deep uranium. And he was saying he knew how the uranium was being diverted and wasn't getting there. I think anybody who's not lazy would go and try to find it. And then the thing that I didn't expect to find was a huge Ukrainian contingent right on the outside. We even drove through this. Right on the outside when we did the Piketon charrette, right on the outside of the Piketon reservation. So
yeah, you actually went to like a Ukrainian party or something. They were having like a festival or something, weren't they?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they had this huge thing at Ohio State. They were growing all kinds of weird genetic modifications. So, and in this book, this RFK daughter-in-law, she's researching this. She's researching dirty bombs. How did this got to be conspiracy theory? I'll never know. And if you ask anybody who would be researching this, if you had solid evidence of several people that said they'd been poisoned and then the uranium wasn't getting there, and you had an informant saying he represented 6 different DHS people saying the uranium wasn't getting there, and he knew how it was being diverted through Ukraine for things like this to create depleted weapons, manufacturing plants, you would go too. And they're the ones that brought in Charleston. I was the one who was heading to Piketon. I was in Ohio, right? And now we see these things getting blown up, and now everybody goes, oh, he was right. That was getting diverted.
Yeah,
well, and what do I say? Nobody's going to go back and go, oh, I remember when George did that story in 2007. They're not going to remember that.
It is true. It's like, that's pretty much what keeps happening though, over and over again to you. It's like conspiracy theorist doesn't know what he's talking about, and then it's like couple years down the line, it's like, oh, he was right the whole time, but we're not going to give him any due diligence. And you've been banned off YouTube. You've been banned off of
Amazon,
Amazon,
and
Patreon. You're not even allowed to like make a living at this point, and it's and it's sad. That's why we need you to, I guess, win one of these court cases so you can keep trudging on.
Yeah. David Underdown saying Patrick Susong's wife, Michelle Chan, played MacGyver's foster daughter. Well, there you have it. We're done now. We got the smoking gun. If you played MacGyver's foster daughter, that pretty much is a smoking gun back to the Winber lab. But is it now that David mentions this, though, isn't it interesting that we take a guy from South Africa who owns the LA Lakers and owns the LA Times, right? CIA LA Times. And then they stick him in Winber? Does that look like it's a cover story so that we can't FOIA any documents from Winber now back to 9/11? And looks like a cover up to me.
That looks like you're right about that, George Webb. But I will officially I guess one more thing. Quick thoughts on FBI Durham report and the fake Russia Trump hoax, I guess. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, it's sort of like saying if the DNC is going to commit all these crimes and then blame the Republicans, and then you come out 6 years later and you say, well, the Republicans didn't do it, that's half right.
Mm-hmm.
But what about investigating the people who actually did the crimes, which was the DNC? That's the part. I sued the DNC in 2017. I figured it out in 2017. These guys still haven't figured it out. They haven't figured out Nate Kane was offering and dangling the emails for Uranium One in the campaign in 2016. He was working for Hillary. People don't understand that. They're giving him money right now in West Virginia. So he worked for Joe Schmitz the whole time. Joe Schmitz made all the people in the foreign policy spies against Trump. So, Durham is like, he gets a C for effort.
C for it. He didn't call George. What if he called George Webb and asked some questions? What would it?
Well, he could have just listened. He could have just listened to the broadcast with the Biden BlackBerry in 2017 and chased the BlackBerry and chased the servers that were connected to the BlackBerry. He would have had all the locations of Hunter Biden in Ukraine and Hunter Biden in Kazakhstan with uranium and Hunter Biden in China. He had all the information he needed, and James Biden and Joe Biden and all the other 45 guys in Congress and all the other people that had him. We know Taggart and Taggart's wife were at Fort Belvoir. They also had the BlackBerries. So, I mean, it just, anyway, never mind.
Follow the Blackberries and follow George Webb on Twitter at RealGeorgeWebb1. Buy the man a coffee. All his links are on Twitter right underneath his profile. Donate to his PayPal, Venmo at GeoWebb, GeoWebb, and subscribe to his Substack. George Webb, thank you once again for gracing us with your presence here on the Live with Andy and breaking down your research that you've been doing. And let's hope one of these days we can get together and be like, we did it.
Winber Charette, June Winber Charette. I can see it coming now. Here we go.
I'll be at the Winber Charette if you're paying, Aaron.
Well, we're going to have a Gettysburg
$5 a gallon gas.
Yeah. Well, you got to fly into Pittsburgh, but Andy, I'm telling you, we're going to have to go to tents on this one because budget's here. But there you go. We'll talk soon.
All right, George. Have a good evening.
Got